They thought they could erase me, as if I were a smudge on their pristine legacy, a fleeting mistake to be swept away with a flick of their manicured hands. For 14 years, I was nothing to them, a shadow they banished, a burden they discarded without a backward glance. But shadows have a way of creeping back, don't they? And tonight, in the glittering heart of their perfect world, I would return, not as the broken girl they cast out, but as the storm they never saw coming. My story begins not in triumph, but in the bitter cold of a Chicago night, where the weight of their betrayal first carved its mark on my soul. It was February 2011, the air so sharp it sliced through my thin jacket, the temperature plunging to 10-degree Corso. I stood on the porch of our 5,000-square-foot mansion in a Chicago suburb, my breath clouding in the darkness, a 20-pound suitcase at my feet. The house loomed behind me, its windows glowing with warmth I was no longer allowed to share. My father, James Carter, stood in the doorway, his face as unyielding as the oak door he gripped. "You're an adult now, Emma," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Figure it out." My mother, Margaret, stood beside him, her eyes averted, as if I were a stranger she couldn't bear to acknowledge. Anne Lily, my younger sister, barely 19, leaned against the frame, her smirk cutting deeper than the cold. "Good luck surviving without us," she said, her voice thick with amusement, as if my ruin were a game she'd already won. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in my bones. I was 21, and the only home I'd ever known had just spit me out. The street stretched before me, unfamiliar and unwelcoming, the snow crunching under my sneakers as I dragged my suitcase. Each step felt heavier, the cold seeping into my fingers, numbing them until they could barely grip the handle. My stomach twisted, empty since breakfast, hunger clawing at my insides like a living thing. I walked for miles, the city blurring past, neon signs, honking cabs, strangers who didn't spare me a glance. 5 miles later, exhaustion forced me to stop near a diner on the edge of town, its back alley reeking of grease and stale bread. The warmth from the kitchen vents drew me like a moth, and I crouched near a dumpster, curling into myself, my jacket offering little defense against the 10-degree chill. My eyes fluttered shut, the world fading, until a shadow loomed over me. "You planning to die back here, or are you just bad at picking places to sleep?" The voice was sharp, edged with impatience. I snapped my eyes open to see a woman, Rita, I'd later learn, standing above me, her thick winter coat a stark contrast to my threadbare one. A cigarette dangled from her lips, smoke curling into the night. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering. "I'm sorry, I'll leave," I stammered. She exhaled, eyeing me for a long moment, then flicked the cigarette to the pavement. "If you're gonna loiter, make yourself useful," she said, gesturing to the diner's back door. "Mop and a bucket inside. You clean, you eat. Deal?" I nodded, the word deal spilling out before I could think. That night, I mopped floors until my arms burned, the linoleum slick under my trembling hands. Rita watched, her sharp eyes missing nothing. And when I finished, she slid a plate of eggs and toast across the counter. $8 worth of food that tasted like salvation. I ate in silence in the 100-square-foot storage room where she let me sleep, the hum of the diner's fridge my only company. As I curled up on a cot, the weight of my family's betrayal settled over me. But so did something else, a promise. One day, I'd make them regret this. One day, they'd wish they'd never turned their backs on me. In that moment, in the dim glow of a flickering bulb, I wasn't just surviving, I was beginning. The world doesn't pause for the broken, doesn't offer a hand to those it's already chewed up and spit out. In the years after that freezing Chicago night, I learned that truth the hard way, carving my survival from the scraps of a city that didn't care if I lived or died. My family thought they'd buried me, forgotten me in their gilded 5,000-square-foot prison of wealth, but I was clawing my way up, inch by painful inch, fueled by a vow that burned brighter than their betrayal. The diner's storage room was just the start, a 100-square-foot lifeline that held me together when everything else fell apart. I woke each morning to the clang of pots and the bitter scent of coffee, my body aching from the cot's thin mattress. Rita paid me $20 a day under the table, enough to keep hunger at bay but not enough to dream. I scrubbed counters, mopped floors, and cleared plates, my hands raw from bleach, my sneakers wearing thin from walking 2 miles to the diner to save $2 bus fare. Every dollar I earned was a weapon, hoarded in a tin box under my cot. By summer, I'd saved $1,000, enough to leave the storage room for a 200-square-foot motel room on Chicago's west side, its walls stained with years of neglect. The $50 a night rent was a gamble, but it was mine, a space where I could breathe, plan, and rebuild. I bought a $5 secondhand textbook on business from a thrift store, its pages dog-eared but brimming with promise. I read by the motel's flickering lamp, the words a map to a future my family never believed I'd reach. Work became my religion. I added a night job cleaning offices downtown, the skyscraper's glass facades mocking my reflection as I pushed a vacuum across 10,000 square-foot floors. Weekends, I stocked shelves at a suburban grocery store, the fluorescent lights buzzing like my own exhaustion. 16-hour days blurred into weeks, then months. My body a machine fueled by $3 coffee and sheer will. My hands, once soft from a life of privilege, were calloused, my nails chipped, but I didn't care. Each $10 tip, each $50 paycheck, was a brick in the foundation I was building. By the end of that first year, I'd saved $3,000, enough to buy a $50 winter coat that didn't let the 0 degree of Chicago wind bite through. It was a small victory, but it felt like a crown. I stood in the motel's cracked mirror, the coat's warmth wrapping me like armor, and whispered my vow again. They'd regret it. The city was a crucible, forging me in its relentless grind. I learned to navigate its rhythms, the clatter of the L train, the hiss of steam from street vents, the indifference of strangers rushing past. I ate $2 diner sandwiches on my breaks, scribbling notes on napkins about markets and strategies, my mind racing even as my body begged for rest. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, stolen in 4-hour snatches between shifts. Yet every ache, every blister was a reminder. I was alive, and I was fighting. My family's mansion, with its $2 million price tag, was a distant memory, replaced by the motel's peeling wallpaper and the diner's grease-stained counters. But I didn't need their wealth. I had something better, hunger, not just for food, but for a life they couldn't touch. Rita noticed the change in me, her sharp eyes catching the fire behind my exhaustion. "You're not like the others who drift through here," she said one night, sliding a $10 slice of pie across the counter. "You've got a plan, don't you?" I nodded, my mouth full of apple and cinnamon, the sweetness a rare indulgence. "I'm going to be someone," I said, the words steady despite the tremble in my hands. She snorted, but there was a flicker of respect in her gaze. "Better hurry up then. World ain't waiting." I took her words to heart, my plan sharpening with every dollar I saved, every page I read. The motel room became my war room, its walls plastered with notes and dreams. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was strategizing. My family thought they'd broken me, left me to fade into Chicago's shadows. But shadows grow long before they strike, and I was only beginning to stretch mine. By the time I'd saved $5,000, 2 years after that freezing night, I knew it. This wasn't my ending. It was my forging, my becoming. And one day, I'd walk back into their world, not as their discarded daughter, but as the woman they'd never see coming. What does it take to forge a phoenix from ashes? Not just fire, but will, raw, unyielding, the kind that turns dreams scrawled on napkins into empires. 2 years after Chicago's streets tried to swallow me, I wasn't just surviving. I was ascending, my ambition a blade honed by every late-night shift and dog-eared textbook. My family thought they'd snuffed me out, but in the crucible of my own making, I was becoming something they could never fathom. From a motel room's flickering light to the polished halls of a New York business school, I built my path, brick by relentless brick, until the world began to bend to my vision. At 22, I stepped into a Chicago community college, its cinder-block classrooms a far cry from the 5,000-square-foot mansion I'd been exiled from. My $5,000 savings were a lifeline, stretched thin to cover $200 tuition and $10 bus passes. I studied on 15-minute breaks between diner shifts, my pencil-scratching equations on napkins when notebooks ran dry. Professors noticed my hunger, not for grades, but for mastery. I devoured marketing texts, memorized financial models, My mind a sponge soaking up the language of power. Nights blurred into dawn. My motel's 200-square-foot confines a cocoon where I transformed. By 23, I applied for a scholarship to a top-tier business school in New York. My essay, a raw account of my disownment, pouring out in 500 words that burned with truth. When the acceptance letter arrived, offering $20,000, I stood in the diner's 200-square-foot kitchen, the scent of grease and coffee swirling around me, and let tears fall. Just one moment, then I straightened, wiping my face. "Back to work," I whispered, because triumph was only a step, not a destination. New York was a beast, its skyscrapers towering over my Chicago grit, but I matched its pace. The business school's lecture halls, with their 5,000 projectors and leather chairs, felt like a stage I'd earned. I dissected case studies, challenged professors, and networked with razor-sharp precision, my $50 thrift store blazer, a badge of defiance. By 24, I landed an internship at a Chicago startup, returning to my city not as a victim, but as a contender. The startup's 10,000-square-foot office buzzed with ambition, and I was its pulse, first in, last out, running projections while others took $15 lunch breaks. I studied executives' decisions, their gestures, their silences, learning the alchemy of influence. Every spreadsheet, every pitch was a thread in the tapestry I wove, a future where I'd never kneel again. By 27, I saw the gap, a $10 billion medical nutrition industry bloated with overpriced, ineffective products. I'd spent years analyzing markets, spotting flaws, and by 30, I launched my company, VitalCore, from a 500-square-foot Chicago office leased for $2,000 a month. Competitors scoffed, investors dismissed me, but I'd learned patience in the diner's shadows. I crafted formulas that worked, marketed them with surgical precision, and by 32, VitalCore was stocked in retailers nationwide, its $100 million valuation a testament to my sleepless nights. I stood in my office, the Chicago skyline glittering through 20-foot windows, and felt it, power, not borrowed from my family's wealth, but forged from my own hands. I tracked Lily's rise, her fake medical credentials flaunted on social media, my parents' clinic raking in $5 million through fraud. I collected their secrets, bank records, emails, never rushing, because I'd learned time was a weapon. My empire grew, but so did my resolve. I wasn't just building a company, I was building a reckoning. The girl who'd shivered in a 100-square-foot storage room was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded boardrooms and turned heads in $500 suits. My family's betrayal was a scar, but scars tell stories, and mine was one of ascent. As I prepared for Lily's wedding, my files neatly stacked, I knew I wasn't returning to beg for their love. I was returning to shatter their lies, to stand taller than their 5,000-square-foot mansion ever could. The world had tried to break me, but I'd broken its rules instead, and now, Chicago's elite would see what a phoenix could do. How do you step back into a world that spat you out? With heels sharp enough to crack marble and a smile that hides a storm. On a February night in 2025, I walked into a Chicago hotel ballroom, the air thick with wealth and whispers, my black gown trailing like a shadow of vengeance. 14 years ago, my family thought they'd erased me, but tonight, I was their reckoning, my presence a blade slicing through their polished facade. The 5,000-square-foot room glittered with $500 tablecloths and $200 champagne, but all eyes were on me, the ghost they'd never expected to face. The ballroom's crystal chandeliers cast prisms across the marble floor, each click of my heels a drumbeat of intent. I was 35, no longer the trembling girl of 21, my $100 million empire, a crown I wore invisibly. The crowd parted, their murmurs a low hum, curiosity and irritation flickering in their gazes. At the room's heart stood Lily, 33, her $10,000 wedding gown, a beacon of unearned privilege. Her practiced smile froze as she saw me, her manicured nails tightening on a champagne flute. "What is she doing here?" she hissed, loud enough for the nearest guest to turn. My mother, Margaret, now in her 60s, stiffened mid-sip, her sharp features curling with distaste. My father, James, the same age, stood rigid, his jaw a line of barely contained fury. Ron, Lily's fiancé, tall and smug in a $5,000 tux, faltered as his eyes met mine, a flicker of recognition dimming his confidence. I stepped forward, my gown flowing like ink, letting their unease simmer. Lily crossed her arms, her voice ablade. "You're not on the guest list, Emma." Her tone dripped with the same condescension she'd wielded at 19, as if I were still a stain on her perfect world. I smiled, slow and deliberate, my voice smooth as silk. "Oh, but I was invited." Confusion flashed across her face, quickly masked by a scoff. "By whom? No one here wants you." The words were meant to wound, but they slid off me like rain. I'd shed their cruelty years ago, in motel rooms and lecture halls. Ron shifted, his brow furrowing, his hands twitching at his sides. "Wait," he murmured, his voice uneven. "This woman is—" He trailed off, fear creeping into his eyes, a crack in his polished veneer. The tension thickened, heavy as the $1 million wedding's opulence. Guests leaned in, their $15 cocktails forgotten, sensing a scandal brewing. I tilted my head, my gaze locking on Lily. "Do you not know anything?" I murmured, my words a velvet glove over a steel fist. She frowned, glancing at Ron, then back to me, her control slipping. "What the hell is going on?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I took another step, my heels echoing in the 5,000 square foot silence, relishing the weight of every eye. My parents stood frozen, Margaret's knuckles white around her glass, James's fingers twitching like a man sensing a trap. I let the moment, my smile widening. "I expected better from you, Lily," I said, my tone light, almost amused. "After all, you've had 14 years to perfect your lies." The ballroom held its breath, the chandelier's light glinting off my gown like a warning. I wasn't here to plead or grovel. I'd built Vital Core from nothing, turned $5,000 into $100 million, and carried secrets that would unravel their world. Lily's smirk, once a weapon, now faltered. Ron's fear was a beacon. My parents' silence was a confession. The 200 guests, Chicago's elite, sensed the shift, their whispers a chorus of anticipation. I stood at the center of their gilded cage, no longer the discarded daughter, but a force they couldn't ignore. Tonight, their perfect, polished lives would crack, and I'd be the one to wield the hammer. What happens when a house of cards faces a hurricane? It doesn't just fall, it shatters, each lie splintering under the weight of truth. In that Chicago ballroom, February 2025, I stood as the storm, my black gown a banner of vengeance, my voice a blade honed over 14 years. The 5,000 square foot space, dripping with 1 million opulence, held its breath as I faced Lily, my parents, and their fragile empire of deceit. They thought they'd buried me, but I'd been gathering their secrets like kindling, and now, with 200 of Chicago's elite as witnesses, I'd set their world ablaze. Lily's eyes burned with fury, her $10,000 gown no shield against my words. "You're lying," she spat, her voice a desperate hiss, but the twitch in her jaw betrayed her. I reached into my $500 clutch, pulling out a folded document, its edges crisp with purpose. "Am I?" I asked, unfolding it with deliberate care, letting the silence stretch. "These are your academic records, Lily. You flunked out of medical school 7 years ago." The ballroom gasped, a collective inhale that rippled through guests standing 10 feet apart, their $15 cocktails forgotten. Lily's face drained of color, her manicured nails digging into her arms. "It's fake," she said too quickly, her voice cracking. I tilted the paper toward Ron, her fiancé, whose furrowed brow deepened. "Feel free to check," I said, my tone smooth as the marble beneath my heels. He hesitated, doubt creeping into his stance, while Lily spun to him, her voice softening. "Ron, baby, you're not listening to her, are you? She's twisting things." But his eyes stayed on the document, her plea a hollow echo in the 5,000 square foot void. I turned to the crowd, my gaze landing on Dr. Peterson, the silver-haired hospital director, his $500 million institution tied to my family's lies. "Dr. Peterson," I called, my voice slicing through the murmurs. "Did you know Lily isn't a doctor?" His eyes narrowed, his composure cracking. "That's impossible," he snapped, turning to my father, James. "You said she had a degree." James's mouth opened, then closed, his face a mask of panic. I smiled, slow and sharp. She doesn't. And your hospital's been letting her consult patients. Peterson's expression turned to ice. His voice clipped. This is a liability disaster. He nodded to his assistant. Call legal, now. The guests' whispers escalated, a storm brewing in their $200 champagne flutes, as Lily's perfect image crumbled. I wasn't done. I faced my parents, James rigid, Margaret's knuckles white around her glass. You should have been more careful, Dad, I said, my tone light, almost playful. I pulled another document from my clutch, its pages thick with evidence. Embezzlement, insurance fraud, falsified patient records. Your clinic's been bleeding $5 million through illegal channels. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, shock rippling like a wave. James paled, his voice a venomous snap. You're bluffing. I held up the papers, bank statements, emails, legal records, each line a nail in their coffin. Am I? I asked, my smile unwavering. Margaret's glass trembled, her silence louder than any defense. Peterson's assistant was already on the phone, security moving in, their 50 an hour presence a grim promise. The final blow waited. I drew a thicker document, stamped with an IRS letterhead, its weight heavy in my hands. Imagine my surprise, I said, my voice carrying through the stunned silence, when I found someone's been using my social security number for years. I tilted the paper, letting guests glimpse the official seal. Tax fraud, money laundering, all tied to your clinic. James lunged forward, his voice a snarl. You think you're better than us? I laughed, cold and clear, stepping closer. I don't think it, Dad. I know it. Security grabbed his arms, his protests drowned by the crowd's gasps. Margaret followed, her face blank, a queen dethroned. Lily sank to the floor, sobbing, her $10,000 gown pooling around her. Ron, silent until now, pulled off his $5,000 ring, letting it clink against the marble, the sound a death knell for their engagement. The ballroom, 20 feet from the chaos, was a theater of ruin, and I was its director. Can you taste freedom? Not the kind promised by flags or anthems, but the kind that blooms when chains you didn't know you wore finally break. As I stood in that Chicago ballroom, February 2025, my family's empire in ashes, I felt it, a lightness, a clarity, as if the 5,000 square foot cage of their lies had dissolved. Lily sobbed, James and Margaret were gone, and I, Emma Carter, 35, was no longer their shadow. I'd built a $100 million empire, exposed their fraud, and now, with the city's skyline beyond 30-foot windows, I was ready to walk away, not as their victim, but as my salvation. I turned from the chaos, my black gown trailing like a whisper of victory, my heels clicking a steady rhythm across the marble. The guests' scandalized murmurs faded, their $200 champagne irrelevant. I didn't need to gloat. Their ruin was proof enough. Lily's broken sobs, James's empty threats, Margaret's silent defeat. They were footnotes in a story I'd rewritten. My $100 million company, Vital Core, stood taller than their $5 million clinic ever could, built not on fraud, but on my sweat, my scars. The ballroom's chandeliers dimmed in my mind, the 5,000 square foot opulence a relic of a world I'd outgrown. I moved toward the exit, each step a shedding of their weight, my heart steady, my purpose clear. Outside, in the hotel's 500 square foot courtyard, Adam waited, his silhouette framed by a 50-foot oak, its branches silvered by moonlight. He'd been my friend through boardroom battles, his wit a balm when memories of that tendaggressive night stung. His eyes held no questions, only pride, a quiet understanding of what this night meant. So, he said, his voice casual, a grin tugging at his lips. Cake? The word broke something in me. Not pain, but a dam holding back joy. I laughed raw and free, the sound echoing across the courtyard, louder than the $1 million wedding I'd left in ruins. It was the laugh of a woman unburdened, the girl who'd mopped floors in a 100 square foot storage room, finally set free. Yes, I said, breathless, taking his hand, its warmth grounding me. Let's get cake. We walked into the Chicago night, the skyline's glow a canvas of possibility. My $100 million empire was just the beginning, my future stretched beyond boardrooms, beyond the scars of a 20-pound suitcase and a slammed door. I didn't look back at the hotel, didn't need to. Freedom wasn't in their downfall, but in my ascent, in knowing I'd built a life without their name, their wealth, their approval. The city's pulse matched mine, its skyscrapers whispering of new horizons. With Adam's hand in mine, the taste of cake already sweet in my mind, I stepped into the rest of my life, not as Emma Carter, their discarded daughter, but as Emma Carter, the woman who'd conquered her own story.